Seafeld, the ag educator in Eau Claire County, Ashley Olson, the ag educator for Vernon County, and Bernie O'Rourke, the youth livestock extension specialist, are also assisting with the webinar series. Please feel free to reach out to us in the chat if you have any questions or comments. We are glad you could join us. If you joined a few minutes ago, you would have seen slides displaying an overview of using Zoom. Please remember the most important Zoom functions, your microphone and video that are located on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and the chat box located at the bottom middle of your screen. Please leave microphones muted during the webinar. There will be a time at the end of the presentation to ask questions. Please ensure your video is off, as this will help with our bandwidth. Please place any questions or comments in the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat during the presentation and reviewing any items of great interest for the group at the end. Before we get started with the presentation, we have a quick poll that we'd like to learn about our producers and who you are with us tonight.
Yeah, so there's a few questions on this poll. And for those of you that might not be familiar, you may need to scroll the poll down because there are a few questions in here. The first one we have is, where do you call home? How long have you been raising sheep or goats? If you have a preferred language, we're trying to learn about our demographics a little bit more just to see if we need to be reaching out and doing some outreach in a different language. And then what type of small ruminants do you raise? And what is the size of your flock or herd? We'll give you a few minutes to complete this poll. Okay, Carolyn, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We've kind of settled out here.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for helping us with that. And Todd, I think that's all of our housekeeping, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand everything over to you.
All right, are we up now? All right, can everybody hear me? Are we good?
Yep, you're good, Todd.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. It looks like, based on the poll, we got a lot of out-of-staters tonight, and that's I think a cool thing. But we've got a good number of in-state, a lot of people with you know, a few years of experience, all the way up to some older, more veteran producers, I would assume. So again, my name is Todd Taylor. I've been the flock manager here in the Arlington Ag Research Station since 2001. So I finished 20 years here. Prior to that, I spent 7 years managing the sheep unit and raising sheep for Texas A&M out of College Station while I was working on a master's degree. And I grew up in Laramie, Wyoming, where my dad was the shepherd at University of Wyoming for 27 years. So basically all my life, I have basically made a living raising sheep, but I've never raised sheep for a living, if that makes sense. So you can giggle about that if you want, but Basically, that's what I've done is I've always raised sheep for a university or in a university setting. We do have a personal flock of our own, and we'll talk a little bit about the dynamics of my experience as we go through this. Basically, what I want to do tonight is just kind of cover the protocol of what we do to manage our ewes here at the research station, and how we go about a year's worth or year in the life, as I used to call this older PowerPoint that I kind of just edited and made it a little fresher and a little more up to date. Although you can see the pictures are pretty dated. A lot of them are back from 2009. So, but our current flock composition is roughly, we've changed things a little bit in the last 2 or 3 years. We're roughly at 200 polypay ewes now is what between what we lambed in the fall lambing and what we'll lamb this winter. We've got about 200 polypay ewes. We've decreased the Hamp and Targhee flock substantially over the last 2 or 3 years. We're going to lamb out about 30 Hampshire ewes this winter, and we lambed out about 10 last fall, and we're down to about 20 Targhee ewes. All ewes are all 3 flocks are registered within their breed. All of them are also enrolled in the National Sheep Improvement Program, which is one of the big assets that we use, or big tools that we use for selecting our replacement females and bringing in stud bucks and things like that, trying to use some of the newer technology that's available to the sheep industry and moving our flock forward, and it's considerably helped our polypay flock for sure. Now I got to go back. Okay, so historically our flock has always been here as a research flock first. Everything from feed trials to years ago we did some reproduction trials, reproduction technologies. We've got some genetic performance projects going on currently. We've also got something that I didn't add on this is we do have a new researcher that's doing some animal behavioral studies now. So some really nifty and neat technology that we've incorporated at the sheep unit here recently. So we've got some of that research going on. Again, we also furnish quite a few sheep to the med school and the vet school for models for biomedical research currently as well. Secondly, we've got a teaching component for the flock. We do not any longer have a sheep production class since Dr. Thomas retired here 4 or 5 years ago. We don't have that anymore, but we do still use the sheep for animal handling and animal welfare classes on occasion. The introductory animal science classes use sheep quite a bit. We still try to support the livestock and meat evaluation programs, both at the campus level and at the 4-H and FFA level. And then we've also reached out and started using the sheep for some hands-on lab training for both the vet school and the Madison area. Madison College Vet Tech program comes out and does some wet labs with our sheep as well. And then, of course, we have a substantial extension and outreach program similar to this, but we also have a big big part in the Sheep and Wool Festival in Jefferson every fall that Wisconsin Sheep Breeders Co-op puts on. We still participate in a lower level at State Fair than what we used to. We do put on an annual shearing school yearly, just finished it up the first part of December. Of course, we help Bernie support our 4-H and FFA programs as much as we can. And it's still available, but not utilized quite as much with the last few years of things changing. We used to do quite a few grade school and high school tours and presentations from Dane County, Columbia County. We've even had some high school FFA programs come from as far away, some of the northern schools as well. So we still have a pretty substantial flock or active flock, I guess, so to speak. We still do show at State Fair. We still participate in at least the National Targhee Show and Sale every year, and we still sell some sheep on several national shows, usually NSIP sales on the polys and the Hamps. We have rams for sale all the time off of the farm. Pretty much any time of year you can contact me, and I might be able to fix you up with a buck prospect. And then we routinely once a year have a fall production sale. We've actually gotten to having a spring sale as well. And those are usually held kind of either online or a combination of live and online. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're at in the sheep program in somewhat of a nutshell. So what I'm here to talk about is how we manage our ewes to get the most productivity out of them. And we're going to make some assumptions in this. We're going to just talk about our general lambing season, which usually starts now. I will tell you, we've only got one lamb on the ground so far this year. In the year in 2022, we did have one ewe lamb about 10 o'clock last night, but I'm still waiting on the floodgates to open and get to lambing. But our typical lambing season, we lamb our mature, what I call our elite ewes, or our ewes that we use to produce rams for sale, replacement females, top end genetics. We lamb those ewes in January. We have a big research group that will do some research that kind of support our polypay research projects. It will lamb the month of February and into the first part of March. And then we kind of wrap things up with just kind of our cleanup ewes, and our ewe lambs, or our first time lambers, typically lamb the month of March into the 1st of April. And then we start weaning from April to June. So the Januaries will be weaned in April. The March is usually in May. The February's in May, and the later born lambs will usually wait till the first part or middle of June to wean. And then we start over again, breeding again in August through October to start the project or program all over again. So we're going to start out with essentially the summer months. So post weaning, assuming the ewes are all dried up and ready to go, we run ewes on pasture typically from May to well into November if we can. If we have the resources, we have good summers, we have lots of grass. We do some rotational grazing on 50 acres of permanent pasture. And I will say the last 2 or 3 years, we've cut that pasture in half to where there's about 25 acres that are rotated into corn, beans, some other crops for crop research out here, and then planted back to pasture or even hay ground after a couple of years rotation to get to just kind of try to do some rotational cropping, so to speak. Our pastures range anywhere from a small half-acre tract all the way up to a 12-acre pastures, and those 12-acre pastures can typically be split up into half-acre. We've got you can see the fences and the fence systems. We've got a rotational grazing system that we can cut those 12-acre pastures into half-acre paddocks and rotate the ewes through most of the summer. So to get the ewes ready to run on pasture, like I said, and we'll talk about weaning at the end of this, but typically this kind of coincides with weaning from the year before. We'll get those ewes dried up in a dry lot on pretty poor quality hay. One of our big issues that we have here in these kind of damp, sandy soils that we have here on the Arlington Prairie is we do have problems with foot scald. So we try to be proactive, and we're starting to finally get ahead of it. We trim feet prior to going out to pasture, and we spray everything with a low percentage formaldehyde spray bottle. So you want to make sure that it's no more than 5% formaldehyde in that bottle. So essentially we take I think it's a 30% gallon that we get from our veterinarians, and we mix it 19 parts of just warm water with 1 part of formaldehyde, and we actually physically spray every foot with it. I feel like we're doing a little bit better job getting to the issue. We've got them tipped up to trim their feet anyway. So we put it in a spray bottle and spray it, typically try to hit between their toes. That way we make sure every sheep gets a little bit or gets enough of it. If we use a foot bath, they splash it all over the place. We get a lot of fumes and a lot of that kind of stuff going on. You do want to be careful with formaldehyde. Make sure that you've got it well ventilated so that you're not breathing those fumes in. But it seems to work pretty well. Anything that has active foot scald, we will sort off and treat with antibiotics and leave in a dry lot for a while till we make sure that they're clean and have no signs of the infection at all. At the same time, we try to worm our ewes before we turn them out. Turn them out on pasture, and then through the summer as we're rotationally grazed, we monitor closely for additional need to deworm later on through the summer as it starts to rain and we start to get more moisture. We might have to worm again through the summer, but we've been pretty fortunate the last few years with our rotational grazing and our worming strategies. We've usually wormed in the spring going to pasture and in the fall coming back in before breeding season. With our rotational grazing program the way it is, we usually move those ewes about every 3 to 5 days. Again, that's going to depend a lot on the growth in those pastures, how many ewes we've got in that certain group. You just kind of have to play it by ear, but that's what's been working for us. And of course, we've always got a free choice mineral feeder out there and fresh, clean water at all times. One thing that I do try to do to just kind of help fend off problems is consider sorting and culling those harder doing ewes that maybe have sucked down and are really thin coming off a weaning and haven't recovered yet in that period of time before we go to grass. We'll sort those off, and a lot of times either get rid of them or at least leave them in on a little bit more grain and a little less hay just to try to get them back up. So, that's one thing that we've gotten. My philosophy in the 20 years I've been here is to cull problems. Don't keep problem ewes. Don't keep problems that just continually develop more problems as you go on and move forward. So our ewes, most of them are bred naturally. As I said, our elite ewes or our higher producing ewes, our genetically superior ewes are bred in August to lamb in January, as close to January as possible. Most of our lambing or our breeding is done live cover. We did venture off and do some AI this year for the first time in probably about 15 years. We used to do some when I was first here, but hadn't had time to do it for a while. But we did kind of venture off to do some AI this year. It's probably something that we will continue to do just to try to bring in some additional ram genetics and not have to buy bucks as often. We may go into doing some more AI. We've got some personnel in our vet staff that are interested in doing it and working with us on it. So we're probably going to start using more AI. But like I said, we do usually breed in August and October, or August, September and October. Our maiden ewes or our first time lambers are our ewes that are bred in October, ewe lambs. Those ewes we typically try to vaccinate for Campylobacter. That's the one abortive agent that we've been able to isolate in this flock that we have a certain percentage of. So we do vaccinate those ewes for Campylobacter 3 to 6 weeks prior to the ram introduction. And then we try to booster them mid-gestation after they're bred. We do a little bit of flushing. You'll find if you come tour our flock, being a university flock, we have lots of eyes. So our sheep tend to stay probably a little fatter than what I know. They stay a lot fatter than our personal flock does that my kids raise. So flushing can sometimes do more damage than good. But if you're in a situation where you're really struggling with numbers of lambs born and don't want to give a boost to your conception rates and the numbers of lambs that those ewes conceive and carry and lay down and have, a little bit of corn goes a long way, or even just a fresh, clean pasture for about 2 weeks before you introduce those rams. And into those first 2 weeks, or at least that first cycle of breeding season, flushing will go a long way in increasing your lambing percentage. We also use vasectomized rams to kind of synchronize our ewes somewhat. By using those vasectomized rams for 2 weeks prior to ram introduction, we can actually shorten up our lambing season by, we can get about 85% of our ewes to lamb in a 14-day or 16-day cycle. And so that'll help you as well, unless you have 100 ewes breed in 14 days and only have 13 lambing jugs, and that can be a real hassle here coming up the first part of February or middle of February. But anyway, the use of vasectomized rams goes a long way in just naturally synchronizing your ewes. We don't use any MGA. We don't use any cedars and PG 600 shots in season. So our August to October lamb or breeding season is all done naturally without any hormonal treatment. Just using those vasectomized rams and doing some fresh pasture flushing more than even feed flushing for us. We do use ultrasound for several reasons, but the biggest one is to confirm pregnancy and also get an estimated fetal count. I trained myself to use ultrasound when I was in graduate school. I learned how to do it at Texas A&M and have continued to do it since I've come up here. Feel very comfortable at least calling pregnancies. Somewhat comfortable in calling multiple births, not as comfortable calling days of gestation as what I'd like to be. It's still something that I'm learning how to do, but we use it to confirm and estimate fetal counts. Try to get an idea that based on or between the ultrasound and using marking harnesses on the rams, trying to get an idea of our grouping in terms of when ewes are going to lamb, so that we can sort in the barn and kind of consolidate our labor and our resources a little bit better. Also gives us an idea of ewes that we may need to supplement a little harder during late gestation, and ewes that we can cut back and not feed quite as much if they don't have as many lambs, if they're not carrying those multiple births. You guys getting any questions in I need to touch base on yet? I haven't been monitoring the chat.
Yeah, Todd, I guess I could just ask this quick one. There's one, when you were talking about pastures, one question was, how do you deliver water to your pastures, or how
Okay.
do the youth receive that?
Let me go back and see. So in these pastures, we actually have an underground water system. We put in essentially an irrigation system about, we probably put this in about 10 years ago now. It's just buried, a foot or so below ground, right along the fence lines. And there's essentially a irrigation spigot about probably every 60 yards or so. I can't remember how I've got it split up. And then we've just got a valve on it that we can turn on, hook a hydrant to it, and it works pretty slick. The beef unit, I think, does similar thing. And I think they've just got black plastic pipe laid on the top of the ground. I'm not sure they ever buried it. We went ahead and buried it here. I know people that, in the summertime, you can get away with laying it on the ground, but you've got to have if you're going to do it that way. And even in our situation, we've got to blow that out every fall before it freezes the first time. But we do have automatic waters gone down our fence lines. And then we use a Premier. What I do is, if you see here in this picture right here in the lower left-hand corner, that flag on top of that T-post, there's a hot wire that runs down the permanent fences, the cross fences, and then we can hook in our electric Premier Electronet fences going across and keep them hot that way. So I've got a permanent electric wire on top of the permanent fences, the perimeter fences, and then can put in the portable fences as we need to move them. So hopefully that makes sense. Anything else? Okay. So once we ultrasound, as long as we still have grass and things are going good, we'll go back out to pasture post breeding as long as we can. Typically, like I said, if I do a good enough job managing these 50 acres that we have here, I can typically run this flock of 250 ewes from May all the way through at least through the 1st of November. We've got some aftermath fields that we can also use through November if we want to stretch it a little bit. But as we get a little closer to our shearing school, the first part of December, when we shear these ewes, we typically like to bring them in and we can put them on some drier margin or mid-quality hays if we have to. But I just as soon leave them on pasture as long as I can. It's nice to see ewes out grazing. They do better. They get more exercise during mid to late gestation. I just think it's better and healthier for the ewes if you have the ability. I know pasture is hard to come by in Wisconsin. So if you don't have pasture, dry lot is fine. And the thing that you can remember is during, after you get the ewes bred and through probably halfway through that second trimester of pregnancy, you don't have to get carried away feeding dairy quality hay. They can live on some pretty marginal lower quality hays and do just fine as long as you've got good access to water and a mineral base. You don't really even need to supplement much corn unless they're on the thinner side, and then you'd want to go ahead and grain them. So if we do go ahead.
Yep, we had a question that kind of relates to what you've just been talking about. If you when you were talking about what's the purpose of flushing ewes, or can you maybe define that a little bit more for some people that were unfamiliar?
So flushing, again, is just an increase in the plane of nutrition prior to the breeding season. So if you've taken an animal science class or think back to some of the ag classes, in any animal, when they're in a depressed state of nutrition, the first function of their body to shut down is their repro system. So if they're on the thin side, or if they're just not doing well, they're not going to ovulate as many eggs. Some of them won't ovulate at all. So the idea of flushing is to take a ewe, and if you use body condition scores, and something I haven't talked a lot about, usually we body condition score ewes on a scale from 1 to 5, where a 1 is extremely thin and a 5 is very, very fat. If you've got ewes that are in a 2.5 to 3, 2 to 2.5, 3% or 3 body condition, a half a pound of corn can potentially increase the number of ovulations. So that's the idea behind that, is to feed a little extra energy to get their bodies to start gaining weight, and then they start kicking in that reproductive system and ovulate typically more eggs. You can increase your lambing percentage, especially on some of the breeds that are a little less fertile. It might help a little bit. If you get into some of the more fertile breeds like our polypays, you got to be careful how much you flush because you can wind up with 10 set of quads out of 80 ewes like we had last year. So flushing can be as detrimental if you're not prepared for it as it can be advantageous. Anything else?
There was a question, why don't you use poly wire instead of the nets when you're running the pasture?
You know, if you can train your ewes to it, you can use anything you want. I just invested in the Electronet. Some of these blackface ewes don't respect the poly wire quite as well and tend to just either go through it or around it or under it. Or, you know, when I was at Texas A&M, we just had smooth wire and we struggled with it all the time. And it seemed like those ewes would figure out that if they'd go through it all at once together, the first and the last one would feel the shock and everybody in the middle would be just fine. So the Electronet seems to work better for us. We have less issues with them. As long as I can keep it hot and keep it firing, we have a lot less issues with them working or messing with it. But there's nothing wrong. Like I said, it's just a matter of, you know, if you use the poly wire, you probably want to use, you know, two to three strands and space them out right so that they hit them with their nose or their head, and it'll do more damage to them and keep them in. So we just went to the poly wire and it's, you know, it's just what's we've had the most success with. Ready to move on then?
Go ahead.
Okay, so if we are in a dry lot situation, or when we do bring them in again, you know, even in November, we won't start them on grain yet. We'll still put them on some big bales, either big round bales or big square bales in our classical feeder system. We've got a feeder system that sits on concrete here on our north barn. We can set 2 bales in each feeder, put about 6 bales out at a time in the 3 pins, and just give them consistent and constant access to our mid-quality hays. Typically, when we bring them in off pasture, we go ahead and worm them or deworm them at that point. And then we will also vaccinate for caseous lymphadenitis. So I will tell you that our vaccination program is probably more substantial than a lot of producers that I visit with. But with our vet staff that we have here at the university and some of the things that we deal with, especially with the biomedical research and some of those kind of things, we really have to watch these different diseases and make sure that we're as free and clean of them as we can be. About 5 years ago, they diagnosed caseous pretty bad in our spooner flock, in our old dairy flock that we had prior to them selling that flock. They were having a lot of problems with CL. And we actually bled some ewes here. We don't see a lot of abscesses in our flock, but we did bleed some ewes here that were positive for it. So my veterinarians at that time decided to go ahead and start vaccinating for it. So we do give a case back shot. Talking to some other colleagues, they recommended that the best time to give it is prior to shearing. So that's just makes sense. When they come into the barn in mid-November to get ready for shearing, we give them that CL shot and get them boosted annually for that. Again, our maiden ewes or our first-time lambers will have to have 2 shots of that. But once they've got that first initial shot and booster shot, they require 1 shot annually, and we time it with shearing. Again, we shear in December. And again, those of you that are on this, you know, you need to think about your shearing protocol and your timing. You need to think about your lambing, and this is all based on facilities and labor and resources. If you don't have a barn to be able to shut them into and keep them out of the weather and provide a little extra comfort to them, if you don't have some good resources in terms of some quality forages, it's probably not a good idea to be taking the wool off of these ewes in December. But if you can shut them in the barn, offer them a little extra resources in terms of feed and energy to help them maintain their body heat, then December is a fine time to shear in this country. But again, you gotta really look at your facilities and whether or not you can help protect those ewes and help keep them warm and dry. And honestly, if you're not going to be able to shear in December, you probably don't want to be lambing in January and February for the most part anyway, because it's going to be pretty tough on those lambs too. So just think about that as you're moving through. We use our ewes for our shearing school in December. Typically have it that first weekend or second weekend of December every year, and peel the wool off of them. And then we can, like I said, start feeding them our higher quality hays. and we'll also start supplementing with a little bit of corn. This picture on the right is our barn system that we have on the north side. We can bring those ewes in at night with a little bit of corn. 1/2 pound per head per day is typically all they need. Keep that barn bedded. We put straw down probably on a weekly basis, every 4 to 5 days at least, or every 7 days at least, but sometimes 4 or 5 days. We put a fresh layer of straw down. So keep it dry, keep the moisture down in that barn, shut them in at night, and then they get pretty comfortable. At the same time, just not too long after shearing, we'll booster all of our mature ewes with Covexin 8. Most people would probably just use CD&T, and that's what we actually just use in our personal flock, is just a 3-way. For sure want to get them vaccinated for enterotoxemia or overeating. That's the Clostridiums type C and D, and then the T stands for tetanus. That's the minimum that you should vaccinate sheep for. We went to using Covexin 8 a few years ago, just because we did see some of the other Clostridials in some ewes we had on campus. So the vet said we probably needed to use that. One word of caution I will say is we used it when I was in Texas A&M on some young lambs, and it created some huge abscesses on those lambs. So we do not vaccinate lambs with Covexin 8, but we will vaccinate our yearling ewes or anything, any of the older stock going into lambing season, we vaccinate with Covexin 8. Otherwise, we just use Barvac CD&T on the younger lambs. Again, we offer more free choice mineral. Each pin's got a fresh automatic water in it that's heated. So we try to keep good source of fresh, clean water in for them. And then we start them on our higher quality hays, our hays that are more nearly like dairy quality hay. That's one thing in Wisconsin, is we have a good source of dairy quality hay. Sheep don't necessarily need it. They really don't have to have dairy quality hay. Most of our hays are mixed of orchard grass and alfalfa. Some of it comes right off of our pastures. In fact, that's what I'm feeding this year, is some pasture hay that we had more grass than I could graze off. So we hayed a couple of pastures, and that's what I've got, is big round bales of a grass alfalfa hay that they're doing just fine on. If you have multiple pins and can sort your ewes either on fetal count, so those ewes that have got triplets, put them in a pen, and you can bump their corn intake just a little bit. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, why that's important. Or if you've got some thinner ewes that look like they're struggling to maintain body condition, you can increase the energy intake, the concentrate on those ewes as well. But it just takes more facilities and more pen space to be able to do that. We do have a camera system for monitoring. This is the older system. When we get towards the end, I'll show you our newer system when we get up here. That just makes it awfully nice to be able to monitor what's going on and be able to keep a little better eye, especially at night. It's nice to have this so that you don't have to get up and walk and traipse out through the snow and the cold to go check ewes. You can do it from the comfort of your house while you're drinking a cup of coffee if you want to. So again, like I said, we lamb in January. So right now we're monitoring pretty close for a lot of these things. Common problems that you want to kind of be aware of as you get into the beginning of lambing. It seems like abortions, if they're going to happen, they typically happen in the first part of your lambing season. And, if you have one or two, and typically in our situation, if we have one or two, we kind of write it off as it's going to happen every year. If we get up to that third one, fourth one, then I may have the vets step in and say, okay, what's causing this? My experience with it is by the time you figure out what's causing it, either the problem is solved itself, or you're too far into it to really have much good or much effect on it anyway. So, using a good vaccination program, like I said, we vaccinate for Campylobacter. We've never had an issue with chlamydia, as far as I know. We've never had any toxoplasmosis. Campylobacter is the only one that we've ever isolated in this flock, so that's the only one we vaccinate against or for. Monitor ewes as you get close to lambing for dystocia. Watch for things like that. As I said about sorting ewes into different groups and feeding accordingly, these next two can be problematic in ewes that have multiple births like ours. Our polypay flock consistently averages about a 240 to 245% drop annually. So what that means is out of every 100 ewes, we have 30 to 35 that have triplets, and last year we had 10 that had quads in them. And that can be a recipe for ketosis or pregnancy toxemia as you get those ewes that are in later gestation. and they're not able to intake enough hay to meet their nutrient requirements. They need more concentrate, consolidated energy, essentially. So corn grain mix, a higher level of concentrate that takes up less room and offers more digestibility and can get into their system quicker, will help fend off ketosis and rectal and vaginal prolapse as well. If they're eating a lot of hay and really filling their bodies full of bulky forage, that puts a lot of pressure on the vaginal and rectal cavities and can really start popping out prolapses and things like that. So if they've got a lot of fetuses in there, they're growing through those last couple of weeks of gestation, you may need to think about limit feeding the hay and increasing the amount of grain to a certain extent, just to kind of balance out their intake and make sure that they can digest and maintain their body stores and take good care of those fetuses in that last part of gestation. We got any more questions so far?
I think you've been doing a good job answering some of the ones that had come in that we were holding off on just a little bit to find the opportune time, Todd. So
I'm just looking at my notes to see if I skipped over anything that I wanted to mention, but I think I'm doing pretty good. So the next few slides are more probably kind of towards the lamb side than really taking care of the ewe, but it kind of goes hand in hand in this time. Again, we lamb, usually this time of year through the first part of March. We do use lambing jugs. We actually have a heated room in our lambing barn that I can keep the temperature between 40 and 50 degrees if I want. It's got an elevated heater in there that really takes the chill off of these lambs. So I feel like I'm spoiled because I know a lot of our personal flock, we don't have this luxury. And I know a lot of other people that don't have a heated area to put lambs in. But we do have these 13 permanent jugs, which is a blessing, but a curse at the same time. When we get into lambing these 100 ewes that I've got bred to lamb in about 3 weeks in January, 13 jugs are going to be just barely enough to get through it. And what it does do is for bonding, it makes our ewes, it makes me select our ewes that are good mothers, that are good at taking care of their lambs, good at keeping track of them, because our ewes only stay in the jugs for probably 36 to 48 hours at the most. If they stay in the jugs more than about 48 hours, there's a problem, and they get an ear notch or an ear tag or a mark in their record that says, I need to look at considering getting rid of them because they just don't work in our system. So our system is pretty, what I want to say, it does a good job of culling out those ewes and aren't as maternal as they should be. We also use the jugs to kind of keep track of that udder and make sure that the udder is healthy, producing enough milk and colostrum to feed at least 2 lambs, 1 to 2 of those lambs. Ideally, I'd like to leave those triplet lambs on them, but with the research projects we've got going, we wind up automatically pulling at least 1 of the triplets and 2 of the quads off of every set. So we do have a pen full of orphan lambs in February and through March. And then, of course, our jugs also kind of allow us to check that lamb vigor, make sure that lamb's getting up and getting going well. And that's the whole purpose of our jug system, is to just kind of, plus we are a purebred flock, so we want to make sure that we have the pedigrees correct, we have the right lambs and the right ewes together. That's the other nice thing about the cameras, is I can kind of monitor that a little closer too, and try to fend off mismothering a little bit better than what I used to.
Todd, there was a question in the chat that kind of relates to some things that you're talking about right now with lambing. How early can sheep lamb before their due dates and have the lamb survive? And how late can they go past their due date before you should worry?
Oh boy, I get this question all the time, and I think it varies it for sure varies from breed to breed, but I think it also varies within genetics within the breed. For instance, the average gestation is 147 to 150 days for most sheep in general. Our polypays that'll have triplets once in a while and quads will lamb as early as 140 days. I would say, typically if we have a ewe go down with ketosis or something like that, I try to get her within about 10 days of her lambing day, of her estimated due date, before I even think about doing a cesarean or inducing that pregnancy, just because, lambs that are 10 days to 2 weeks early, typically we struggle getting them to survive. They just don't have the lung capacity yet. They just don't have the lung development yet to get up and get going. So I would say, minimum of 10 days early is probably, and I would even say closer to a week if you can get it to go that long. As far as going overdue, you know, our targies that have big singles and even our Columbia flock, when we used to have Columbias years ago, and my kids' flock, we'd have some of those go 153, 154, 155 days on occasion. So again, it varies. But that 147, 148 days as a rule of thumb is pretty good. But just keep in mind that you can go 4 to 5 days either direction on that. So when we do bring them up, a couple of things that, you know, that I always tell we must do, especially if you're in a barn lambing situation, is you definitely need to iodine those navels or dip them in something. Make sure that those lambs all get adequate colostrum. As I said, one thing that we do as well, you know, like I said, we have 35, 40 sets of triplets and you know, close to 50 ewes that have triplets or better every year in our polypay flock. One thing I like to do in those triplets, twins and singles, I'll typically let them get up and nurse on their own and try to just take advantage of that maternal instinct and let those ewes take care of them. If I have triplets or quads, I typically like to milk that colostrum out and split it between all 3 of them. Because what I found over the 20, 30, 40 years plus years that I've been raising sheep is if you've got a set of triplets, you know, 2 of them will get up and nurse that ewe out pretty quickly. And the third one typically doesn't get its share of that colostrum to begin with. So, you know, I'll try to get a bottle of colostrum milked out of that ewe, or if I can't get that much out for some reason, and typically if our ewes are doing what they're supposed to, they should produce a 16 to 18 ounce bottle of colostrum pretty readily. And then I'll go ahead and split that up between those lambs. So at least all 3 of them get that first 6 ounce dose of colostrum right away. So that's helped our survival rate on our triplets and quads quite a bit by doing that. We also do use, and I should have changed this, we don't use Nutri-Drench anymore. We use the Premier Baby Lamb Strength or that they sell. And we also use a product called Spectinomycin or Spectam that you can actually get at Fleet Farm or Farm and Fleet. It's more of a baby pig scour medication, but we've had some E. coli scours in our facilities that we want to try to fend off. And that Spectinomycin works exceptionally well, giving them a squirt of that along with their colostrum.
Todd,
Again,
question.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the oral gel colostrum supplement for triplets? Is that something that people should be looking at?
I've never used it. I mean, my philosophy is there's nothing better than ewe colostrum or goat colostrum, or, you know, the milk that ewe, you know, that's the best. I do purchase usually from Premier. They have those little round jars that you can buy. One of them's got a blue lid and one of them's got a yellow lid. One of them's a supplement, first milk supplement, and the other one's a colostrum replacer. You know, neither one of them are as good as the real thing. But again, I always try to keep something like that on hand just for that one ewe that I just can't get enough out of, and I need to do something for that lamb. We do try to, like, if we have a ewe that has single or twins and has a ton of colostrum and I feel like the lambs have got enough in their bellies already, we will harvest some of that extra colostrum and freeze it and put it in the freezer and thaw it out for those occasions that we have a ewe that comes in with either no milk or, you know, not enough milk for all of her lambs, so that I can supplement some of that liquid gold, as the sheep producer calls it. We can get some of that in these lambs. But, you know, somebody that's got more experience with the colostrum gel would have to answer that question. That's not something I've ever used. Again, while they're in the jugs, like I said, within the first 24 hours, we try to take a birth weight. We try to get them ear tagged. We do use Bo-C, and we've actually cut this back to a half a cc just because, you know, I don't think we need to give them a full cc shot of Bo-C. Every lamb gets a half cc shot of Bo-C. We haven't seen a case of white muscle, as far as I know, in the last 20 years since I've been here. But they did have some diagnosed at one of our other facilities a year or two prior to me coming here. They had some white muscle disease. So we just routinely use Bo-C. Again, that's a product you have to get with a veterinarian script. And then be careful with it because you can overdose with it. But, you know, like I said, a half to 1 cc shot goes a long way. We also make sure we have plenty of selenium and vitamin E balance in our ration. Our mineral actually has a boost of both in it. So we feel like we're getting enough selenium and vitamin E to balance that out and try to fend off white muscle disease. So We also do go ahead and give a second dose of Spectam when we dock the tails, put those bands on, put them back with their moms for, another 6 to 8 hours before we start taking them out of the jug. So we try to get all of this done. I would even try to castrate anything that I know is not going to stay a stud buck prospect in the jugs while they're little, just to try to get all that stress off of them as well. We don't castrate very many lambs here. We either sell them as intact rams, but we sell so many stud buck prospects here that very few lambs get castrated in this flock anymore. So then once we get everything taken care of, the lambs are doing good, we'll slowly move them into our smaller mixing pens. Here on this left picture, we've got 3 of these smaller pens that can hold 5 ewes in their lambs. We've got 4 more here in an outside wing off of the side of the barn that we can mix them in. So they'll stay in our jug room and into these mixing pens till they're probably 4 or 5 days old. And we just continue to keep monitoring them, mostly to make sure that their bellies are getting full, that they're staying thrifty and healthy. When it's cold, you can really start seeing lambs that are hungry because they stand hunched up, head down. They're not playing and jumping around like the rest of the lambs during feeding. So we watch for those kind of things, and then try to find those ewes that are just struggling to keep their lambs healthy and fed well. And those lambs get a check mark in their record, and we consider getting rid of them after weaning if they're not taking care of their lambs like I feel like they should. Gradually, we get them moved from Columbia County to Dane County. From the north barn to the south barn, we move the ewes across the road and put them in bigger pens. Our pens on the south side and this feeding barn on the south side will hold 20 to 24 ewes, ewe and lamb pairs, with a creep feeder in one corner. And and then we just continually monitor them again just to make sure that they're getting plenty of nutrients. We get that creep feed in for them by the time they're 4 or 5 days, at least by the time they're a week old, they're getting access to grain. Usually they don't start hitting it real hard till about 3 weeks of age, but we just try to get them exposed to it as soon as we can. Our ewes on this side of the road are fed haylage instead of dry hay. Haylage out of our feed bunks. We've modified our barn and put a windbreak up with a curtain that drops down on top of that windbreak just to kind of help it be a little bit more enclosed on 3 sides, or 4 sides, I should say. This is a 420-foot barn and can be a wind tunnel in the wintertime. So putting this windbreak up, this screen here, the plywood windbreak, and then the curtain that drops down on top has really made it a much more comfortable environment, both for the ewes and the lambs, and even more so for my feed help that runs up and down this alley, putting hay and grain in this J bunk. So that helps quite a bit. Again, we watch for things like mastitis. Mastitis is probably the biggest thing that hits us over here. My feed help that does chores in the morning is very good at recognizing changes in behavior and noticing those ewes that are off the feed a little bit, and we get in pretty quick and start watching for mastitis. Again, we've kind of talked about all of this pretty quickly, and I'm starting to run short on time, so I probably need to kind of breeze through these a little bit quicker. But these are just a few things that we do with the lambs, not so much the ewes. Vaccinate those lambs for CD&T when they're about 3 to 4 weeks old. We booster them at about 6 to 8 weeks just prior to weaning. We try to do everything we can while they're still being raised by mama. We do DNA test quite a few of them, and we're actually getting into doing a lot of genomics testing, it looks like, in the future. So we're going to be doing a lot more further testing than just testing for scrapie resistance, spider syndrome, some of those kind of things. Now the dwarf gene in the hamps, some of those kind of things that we test for. We're probably going to get involved in some genomics research projects this year and into the next 2 or 3 years. And then again, like I said, I should have probably taken this last statement out. On occasion, we might castrate a ram lamb as they're getting up there towards 6 weeks old. But if I do that, I'll probably have my veterinarians come out so that they can monitor pain and some of those kind of things. Just because of the situation we're in here, we do things a little bit more precisely than what some commercial flocks probably have to do. So like I said, if I am going to castrate, I probably try to do it in the jugs, or we don't do it at all. When we get ready to wean, we wean these lambs at an average of 8 weeks. So we'll take that weaning weight. We'll do that last vaccination at that 8-week interval. And then we take the corn complete, and we'll actually probably pull the corn on the ewes at about 7 weeks. We'll decrease the energy intake or completely take the corn away. We might leave them on the haylage for a couple more weeks or at least another week. Then when we get ready to really dry them up, we'll pull the haylage, that good quality hay that's coming out of silos, we'll pull that away. And I usually stockpile some dry first crop grass, alfalfa or straight grass bales, and we'll bring those in and hand feed that for those last 2 weeks while we're drying those ewes up. I don't mess with water. I know some people that do, but I do not. I don't believe in messing with water. They'll stay on full access to water, but we do pull hay back, put them on some really, I mean, I've even seen people put them on wheat straw or corn stalks for those last 2 weeks just to dry them up good. Leave those lambs nursing on them. Then when we get ready to wean, we'll do it cold turkey. We'll pull the ewes away from the lambs and move them back to the north barn, and we'll leave the lambs right in the pens that they were at. And again, you know, once we pull those ewes off, we're going to still monitor for mastitis. Some of our heavier milking ewes, you know, if we wean right at 60 days, some of those ewes are still milking pretty heavy. So we do need to watch pretty close, but we're starting to get that under control, and our weaning process seems to be working pretty good. And then, you know, a couple of things that we have done over the years is we did eradicate, or I feel like we've eradicated OPP. Ovine progressive pneumonia is a disease that it's similar to a chronic wasting disease. It really affects their milk production is the first sign of it. They'll come into the jugs with big, heavy udders that look like they're producing exceptionally well, but when you really get in and handle those udders, they're pretty firm to the touch, and you just don't get much milk production out of them. They look like they should be producing really well, but there's nothing there. That was the biggest sign of us having OPP years ago. So about 10 years ago, we started working on eradicating it. For the last 4 years, we haven't had a positive case of OPP on the flock that I'm aware of. So that's really helped our ability for these ewes to raise and take care of twins and triplets and have really good weaning weights. But it was a painstaking process, and it's still something we monitor annually with a blood test. We try to monitor 25 to 40 ewes a year just to make sure we don't see it pop up again. Like I said, for the last 2 or 3 years, we haven't had a positive case anywhere in the flock to my knowledge. As I said earlier, we use NSIP to estimate or to generate estimated breeding values, and we use those to make selection decisions, both on our keeping our replacement ewe lambs as well as the bucks that we use from year in and year out. That program really does a good job of estimating the breeding potential for everything from growth traits to numbers of lambs born to wool traits on the targies, carcass traits on the hamps. All of those kind of things are pretty valuable to us in making selection decisions, and it works pretty well. As we move forward, as I said, we're going to start getting involved in some genomics research projects. They're going to even take that to another level, and I'm pretty excited about the future of that. And again, keep good records. As I said, you know, every time we see a problem in the flock, we try to mark that in her records. We try to, you know, like I said, we weigh all the time. We went to electronic ear tags here about 3 years ago, where everything's entered into the computer system pretty quickly and automatically. It's amazing how many weights I take on sheep. I go through and pull up weight records on some of these, and you know, I'll have 15 weights in a calendar year on some of them because it's so easy to record it now. But good records goes a long way, especially in this next one, and having strong culling practice. Get rid of problem sheep. I've done pretty well with it in our UW flock. Our personal flock's another story because everybody has their favorite show sheep that tend to be a problem in the barn. And you know, I'd like to cull them, but the wife and the kids don't necessarily like to cull them. So you know, if you can be real diligent about culling problems, get rid of problems so they don't breed problems into your flock, it goes a long way. So I think that wraps up the general gist of what I had to try to present in a short period of time tonight, and we can open it up to more questions, comments.
Todd, we had a question. What's your protocol for treating mastitis?
It varies in the case, but typically it's simply just antibiotics and mostly just penicillin. You know, shots of penicillin if we catch it soon enough. We will use what is the product, amoxamast, the mastitis tubes. We will use that in more tough cases that really have, need further antibiotics, we might for a couple of days, squirt a half a tube of amoxamast in each teat, and try to help with that. Those ones that are really bad, we probably want to milk that, as much of that milk out as we can. Keep those ewes isolated from other ewes because it can be transmitted. That's one thing with the new animal behavior research I want to look at, and I'm encouraging to look at, is how much mastitis is spread by lambs that thieve from one ewe to the next and carry it on, and some of those kind of things. But our main, penicillin is still the best treatment we found, probably a 5 to 7 day course of penicillin. And then just, if it is a bad case where it's really causing a lot of pressure on the udder, keeping her milked out somehow, is the other one that, that you might want to, the other procedure you might want to take on.
Todd and Lissa, Cody has his hand raised. Cody, if you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question, feel free. Unless you just have your hand up, that could be too. If you have a question, go ahead and just put it in the chat. There was a question, or actually a couple of them, Todd. I just scrolled back, Lissa. Do you do tours of your facility? There's a couple of questions of that. And then COVID.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, just contact me for tour. Pre-COVID in 2020, we did a open barn and open, during lambing season, and allowed people to come in and take a look and ask questions, on site. Had a good response with that. My goal with that was to actually probably in the future offer a lambing school. That has not materialized yet, but it's still something on my radar where we can, offer you for a small fee to come in, and we'll bring in some speakers to talk about some of these more technical things, but then allow you some hands-on work in the lambing barn during lambing season. So watch for that on your radar. That's still something that is a dream of mine, to host maybe a couple of different weekends that we can bring people in and have a lambing school. So, but tours, yes, tours are fine. Just need to contact me ahead of time to schedule it. But yes, we do tours quite regularly.
So Todd, earlier you were talking about a little bit about pregnancy toxemia being a problem. Can you touch on how you treat and manage pregnancy toxemia?
So trying to manage away from it is our best strategy, to try to keep those ewes in better condition. As I said, knowing which ewes have got multiple births, and if they've got multiple births, and you can already see them starting to drag down in terms of body condition, trying to sort those ewes off and offer them a little bit more. Where we usually see it, and I've got a ewe in the lambing room right now as we speak, that went down last week as it started getting cold. She's a younger ewe. She's probably got a set of big twins in her. She's a target ewe, and she's in a little poorer body condition, and she'd started going down on me. Right away, I put her in one of my mixing pens in the lambing room so that she doesn't have to fight with the cold. And I shifted from her getting quite as much hay and bumped her grain intake. As long as I can keep her on her feet and keep her moving around where she gets to grain and hay and can drink water, I feel like she'll get through it. But we will on occasion have one that will go down on us completely and cannot get up. I bring my, I have a little different situation than what most personal flocks do. I have a veterinary staff that takes care of the university animals. When we have a case like that, my veterinarian will come out. She will typically give IV fluids. And if it's a worst case scenario, we'll actually hook her to an IV drip. And we will let her drip those fluids and those energy supplements as long as we feel like she's staying comfortable, not totally down and out. If she looks like she's got some desire to live and go on, we'll try to keep her on those until I feel like she's within those 4 or 5 day window of lambing, and we'll go ahead and induce her and try to get those lambs out of her so that we don't lose the whole works. So that's a worst case scenario. And again, that's pretty intense way to do it. But I have the advantage that I do have vets here that can do that for me. If you don't have that advantage, it does take a little bit more vet client relationship and could be a little bit more costly unless you really got a ewe that is worth a lot. It may not be worth it. We do use propylene glycol and other energy supplements. Don't seem to have as good a luck with that as the IV fluids. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit more. Again, if you are having trouble with that, maybe a direct email or a call to me sometime. We can sit down and try to get a game plan on something like that. But prevention is our biggest ally when it comes to pregnancy toxemia, but we have had some success with treatments as well.
Okay. You mentioned, upping the grain and things like that. And that goes back to a question that we had in the chat but that relates to how or when do you know to start supplementing the ewes with grain? Are there certain times a year that kind of trigger that, or what kind of time frame are we looking at? Just some general guidance on when you start feeding grain.
So usually, we coincide it with shearing. We take that wool off of them. We're taking that source of insulation off of them. We need to give their body some sort of a internal combustion engine, so to speak, and that grain helps with that. Our higher quality hays help with that. Usually as they turn the corner into that last trimester, when those feed, especially if they're growing 2 to 3 lambs and sometimes 4 lambs, it gets really critical. That's when you really want to increase the concentrated energy. So the corn, the grains that take up less internal space but are still very digestible, that's when you want to increase that. So for us, that's usually coincides with shearing school, the 1st of December. And then we monitor those ewes as we get into those ewes that I know are going to have triplets and they're still looking a little thin to me. They haven't kind of gained weight. We might sort those off and even increase their grain a little bit more. For our flock right now, you saw that picture that I was showing just a minute ago before they took me off a share screen. Those ewes are getting just about a pound per head per day of corn. They get turned out on those big bales of quality hay, that alfalfa grass mix hay. We don't limit feed the hay other than they're only out on them for about 8 to 10 hours a day. And then they're shut in the barn where they don't have 24/7 access to the hay all the time. The biggest problem we have with self-feeding hay is their bellies filling full, and then we wind up with those prolapse issues. So that's something else that we try to fend off with, where we can't limit feed forages and they can fill themselves up with much of it as they want to eat. We can run into problems with prolapses. So that's by limiting their time on the forage is how we try to get away with that.
Another nutrition related question. So you mentioned feeding corn. Is there, a difference between feeding corn versus say maybe some oats with a complete feed to make sure that you're getting the vitamins and minerals that you need? Or is there some, economic considerations that we need to be thinking about as we think through that question?
It depends on your feed salesman. Corn has always been just straight corn and a good quality hay has been our most economical source. I mean, there's good textured feeds out there for ewes. But I don't think that they really, if you're paying attention to your forage quality, to your mineral, get your forages tested so you know the mineral content of it, and get your mineral supplement built according to what you're deficient in that corn and hay mix. And don't make it more, don't make it harder than it has to be. Sheep can be a very easy critter to take care of. They don't need a lot of those other grains. That's not that you can't use them. I mean, we use oats and we use an alfalfa pellet and we use a protein pellet in our grower and creep rations, but in our ewe ration, forage and corn for an energy supplement is really all that we feel like they need. And it's worked well for us for years. So, I'm not telling you that you can't, or you don't, you can't see some benefits in some of those, but you start mixing those other feeds in, you're just increasing your costs. And I don't know as if you're getting enough benefit out of to take away from corn's high enough price right now. So we don't worry about anything other than corn, but other than making sure that our mineral balance is correct as well.
Okay. Well, Todd, it is 8:35, and I know we've got quite a few more questions in here, but we do want to have everyone take a few minutes and fill out our evaluation for tonight. And Todd, if you have a little bit more time, if you want to answer a couple more questions, we can. Otherwise, we'd like to thank Todd for his time tonight and really appreciate you being here to answer all these great questions we've had coming in the chat.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just kind of monitoring a couple. I see a couple people ask about the difference between cracked and whole corn. Yeah, we don't crack our corn for, anything but our creep ration. Our creep ration has got cracked corn in it just because baby lambs don't do as well with whole corn, but sheep will do a really good job of processing corn themselves. So whole corn to use is fine. Even whole corn to weaned lambs in our grower and finishing ration does pretty well. So like I said, sheep can be pretty efficient and cost effective to take care of.
And as people are filling out the evaluation, I just want to remind everyone, we do recognize that we ask you guys a lot of questions, and part of this is to make sure that we are able to provide you with the best information that we can. Part of this is to meet our federal requirements so that we can continue bringing programming like this to you. So we really do appreciate you taking a couple of minutes and filling out our evaluations. We do know that it's a lot that we ask. So thank you for those of you that are filling that out for us. We do appreciate that. Let's see. Todd, there was a question here about how do you manage for breech births? Is there any connection between lambing position and ewe movement prior to birth or not?
I don't have any tricks of fending it off. I mean, it's something that, especially with our polypays and these multiple births, almost every set of triplets we have will have at least one lamb born backwards. And a lot of times it's the first lamb, it seems like, and I'll find ewes that seem like they've been in labor for a long time and nothing's happening, and all of a sudden I'll decide I better go check, and sure enough, that first lamb is typically breech. And all it takes is a little straighten out. I don't know as if there's any way of preventing it. It's just that, be prepared to help solve it. Glove up, lube up good, go in there, and typically if they're breech, the easiest way to get them is to push on their backs and push them in and wind up bringing them backwards. They'll usually come back legs first, and it just takes time and practice and patience. It's funny because on these polys, we'll have the first, if we have one born breech like that, we get it out of the way, and the other two or the other three, if it's a set of quads, come, and when just a matter of, she's ready to get them all out by the time you get to that point. But, exercise, I think, helps if you can have some distance between feed and water just to make those ewes exercise a little bit. But I still don't think that there's a definite true answer to preventing a breech birth.
And for those of you that may or may not have been watching the chat, we have had quite a few questions regarding mastitis, and I know Carolyn's been diligently answering a few as we go. Todd, I'll just list a couple of those to make sure we've got them covered. There's a question about, would LA 200 work for treating mastitis too? Is there a specific reason for using penicillin? And is there an age that you find that, mastitis happens the most, or, what's that kind of scenario look like?
I've seen it everywhere from when we bring them into the jugs to just before weaning. We see it pop up. Probably more common at that, at that later lactation window between 30 to 60 days is when we probably see more of them. Again, I don't know why LA 200 wouldn't work. Again, I would probably just visit with your veterinarian and use what works best for you. For us, penicillin has been the best bet. That's just what, so I have protocols written by my veterinarians. We collaborate back and forth and adjust them all the time, but I have standard operating procedures or protocols written for all of these different diseases so that I can treat on the spot and not have to call a veterinarian every time. And penicillin is what we wrote up to use for that. Penicillin and amoximast is what's written into our protocol. So that's what I use. I mean, I'm not saying it's the end all beat all, but it's what's been, the best line of action for us.
Yep. Let's see, what else do we have? lambs off like a you know, a creep feed lamb mix versus using just like whole corn?
So right now, we have 3 stages of a ration, our lamb ration. Our starter ration is a 19%, and it's actually a pelleted ration now. Our feed mill here right on the station makes it, and it was cheaper and more efficient for them to just pellet the whole thing together. We used to make a protein pellet and mix it with cracked corn and put a little bit of oats in it just for texture. But we've gone away from that just because it's cheaper and more efficient for them to just pellet the whole thing. So we have a pelleted 19% starter. Then at weaning, we will transition them to a 16% intermittent ration that's still a pellet. We'll stay on that for about 30 to 45 days post weaning, and then we change them to a 13% finishing ration. And again, it's all of these are pelleted because, like I said, I would rather just use a whole corn mixed with a protein pellet, but it was cheaper and more efficient for them to just pellet the whole thing at our feed mill. So we've gone to a straight pelleted ration all the way through. We'll grow those lambs all the way through the summer and into the fall on that 13%. We leave that 13% on our stud bucks. Our yearling ewes get that 13%, you know, probably until we move them to across the road. So, you know, it used to be that we would go from our 19 to our 16 and then our 13, that finishing ration from about a 90 to 100 days was a whole corn, whole oats and protein pellet mix. And, you know, they would finish on that. So, you know, we'd start with a cracked corn through weaning, kind of mix a cracked and whole corn together through that intermittent 16%. And then by the time they were, you know, 90 to 100 to 120 days of age, they were on a whole corn, whole oats and protein pellet mix. If that, hopefully that answers the question. Long story short.
Yep. We had a couple of questions about bloating. So is bloating in lambs an issue? And then this, let's see, there was a second one in here. And have you had any experience with providing baking soda, free choice to fend off bloat if there's a
I have never done that. We do have in our orphan pens and our artificially reared lambs that are on, we use a lactech machine and we also use a lamb bar bucket and try to feed them, you know, so that they have milk in front of them all the time so that they're not gorging themselves when we do put fresh milk in there for them. But we still have more abominational bloat in our orphan lambs than what I'd like. And I haven't figured out exactly how to prevent it yet. One thing we have gone to doing is our orphan lambs get more booster shots of CD&T more frequently. So, you know, we might give them their first CD&T shot when they're 2 weeks old and give them a booster shot every 2 to 3 weeks after that, you know, so they've had a couple of CD&T shots before we wean them off that milk replacer. But that's probably where I see the worst problem with bloat is in our artificially reared lambs. I don't see it a lot in our naturally reared lambs. It's just in our orphan pen there we see it. And it's still a problem that I'm trying to figure out the best source of prevention, because it was better this last year than it was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I had problems with our milking machine going down on me. It'd go dry for a while, then I'd get it going again, and those lambs gorge on it. We wound up with losing some lambs to bloat. But the last couple of years, it hasn't been quite as bad because I got my equipment to work better. So it's one of those live and learn experience type things. But that's where we see it. I never use baking soda. That's something that I might consider. I'll talk to my veterinarian about and see. I don't know how well lambs will consume it. You know, if they're not, you know, I don't know whether they'll crave it and go to it or not. So it's not something that I've ever used on anything here.
You're talking about the lamb bar. Is there a certain temperature that you know, milk is being fed to those lambs? Can that be a factor in how much they're kind of taking in one, you know, drinking bout?
Yeah. So if we use a lamb bar, the mid-states bucket or premier buckets, we try to feed it to them cold or you know, we'll mix it up the night before or the morning of and put it in the refrigerator and then add it as we go. It just seems to slow them down a little bit. My lactech machine that I have, I think that machine runs at, I can't remember what the heater is on it, but I want to say it's like at 90 degrees or something like that, that it's mixing that milk every time. But again, that milk's in front of them. If it's working properly, it's in front of them all the time, and then they'll get accustomed to it, and they'll only nurse as they need to. Or as they need more milk, they'll go nurse on it. So, if you're using the lamb bar bucket, I would suggest feeding cold milk, just because it will slow them down. They will eat smaller amounts more often, and then make sure that it doesn't go completely dry. I mean, if it goes dry, it goes dry when you want to clean that bucket out and then fill it back up again. So, if they run out and then you pour it in again for them, that's when they seem to really crave it and get after it. And that's when you can run into bloat issues. Hopefully that helps.
Yep, thank you. We had a couple of questions that wanted to know about how often do you swap out your rams?
In terms of genetics, I think is what they're asking. It kind of depends on the U base that we've got. I've got some rams that I used for 5 or 6 generations. If I had enough ewes that I could continue to use them on without breeding them back to their daughters. But it just kind of depends on the ram. I might use a young ram once and just to get some lambs on the ground and then offer him for sale as a yearling. But our good stud bucks, I probably go out and try to buy a new genetic package about every 3 years or every 3 lambing seasons, something like that.
Okay, and I think we're getting to the tail end of questions here. What is your feeding protocol for ewes after lambing and until weaning?
I probably kind of glanced over that a little bit. So, when they're in the jugs, they get a flake of hay for the first 24 hours, and then we put them back on a half a pound of corn morning and night while they're in the jugs. Once we move them out, they're still getting probably a half a pound per head per day. When we bring them across the road and put them in our big general housing pens, again, they're probably getting, self-feed on the haylage coming out of the silos. So they're probably eating 6.5 to 8 to 9 pounds of haylage per head per day. Again, that's high moisture feed. So they're only getting about 4 to 4.5 pounds of dry matter a day, but that's probably what they're consuming. And then we supplement grain based on how many lambs are in the pen. So it's usually a pound of grain or a pound of corn per lamb. So if a ew's got 2 lambs on her, we want to bump her up to 2 pounds of corn per head per day. Ideally it'd be good to spread that out over 2 feedings, but we only feed once a day. So, they get their grain supplement in the morning, they get the hay along with it. So if there's 30 lambs in a pen, 20 ewes will get 30 pounds of grain a day, plus whatever haylage again, you got to kind of monitor the body condition, kind of monitor the forages that you've got. Again, the size and the weight of your ewes is going to vary. You're going to probably need to talk to a nutritionist or run a ration balancing program to make sure you're feeding enough. But again, it kind of depends on how many lambs those ewes are raised and how much grain we give them.
Yeah. We had a follow-up question to that. Can the ewe get hay and grain immediately after lambing, or should they wait a little bit of time?
I would give them, we usually give them, we don't give them hay and grain right away. I mean, we'll put a fresh bucket of water in for them because usually after labor, they're thirsty and they need that water to get them going. But we definitely want that ewe to spend more time, especially these black faces seem to like their grain better than their lambs. We definitely don't want to give them anything until they've taken a chance to get their lambs taken care of, get those lambs up. I usually don't like to feed them anything until I see those lambs get up and nurse the first time, just to try to make them concentrate on taking care of those lambs, getting their bellies full. So we probably won't, if they're born in the morning, we won't offer hay until midday or even in the evening. And then we probably won't put them on grain until the next morning, if that makes sense. One thing I have done that's kind of a cool trick is if you have a knot-headed young ewe that doesn't want to take her lambs, don't want to lick on her, I will sprinkle a little of that grain on her lamb and let her lick that off of them. That helps sometimes. But that's the only grain they get until they get those lambs up and get them nursing. So
that's good that you share that, because I think there was a question in here about managing ones that aren't taking to their lambs. So if you want to expound upon that and maybe some other tricks you have.
Put a cull tag in their ear and send them to the sale barn. No, I mean, honestly, there's, we use grafting stanchions. We use, some of those kind of things. But, some of these ewes just, we have some young ewes that on occasion just don't know how to be a mother. and, you know, making good records. I might give them one chance if they're a first time lamb or a young ewe that went through a stressful labor and she doesn't want to take her lambs. I might give her one more shot, but typically, you know, in our flock here at the unit, we just don't have time to deal with those kind of behaviors. So if they're, you know, it's kind of a natural selection criteria for us that, you know, if they're not smart enough to get their lambs dried off and cleaned up and going, you know, they don't stick around very long, especially when I have another market for them for either biomedical models or something like that. They tend to be the first ones that get earmarked for some of those kind of programs. So, but like I said, we do some slime grafting on triplets and quads. If I have a single born relatively, in conjunction or relatively at the same time, same day, you know, we'll try to do some slime grafting and get some ewes to take some orphan lambs that way once in a while, and it works pretty well.
And Todd, just pause a second. For those that might not know, that may be newer to production, what is slime grafting?
Okay, so or wet graft, it's slime grafting, wet grafting. You know, if you're outside and it's cold and freezing, it's not probably a good program to try to use. But if you've got some supplemental heat where you can keep the lambs warm, essentially we're taking a lamb that is not hers and getting it wet and covering it with all the fluids and as much of placenta and afterbirth as you can to try to make her think that she had multiple lambs. If you know, my advantage with ultrasounding ewes, I know ewes ahead of time they're going to have singles. And a lot of times if I know she's going to have a single and I can do it, I'll pull the single lamb with the lamb I want to graft laying right there behind her so that she never sees either one of them until it's all over with. And then as soon as she gets up, she sees two wet lambs. So that's always my most successful grafting situation. But it's not always the most ideal situation to do either. So but that's essentially what a slime graft or wet graft is.
Okay, I think that we've gotten through most of the questions. If there is a question that I missed, please bump it down in the chat so we can see it quick. But otherwise, I think we're going to wrap up here because we were definitely over what we were planning on tonight. But we do appreciate all the really great questions. And Todd, we do appreciate your time and expertise for being here tonight.
And you all have my email address. You know, send me an email, and if it requires a phone call, I'll share my cell phone number with you later on, and we can, you know, that's kind of part of what I enjoy doing is try to troubleshoot for people. So
great. And then Carolyn, I think you had a couple of last comments.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. What a great conversation we've had here at the end. Feel free to contact your local ag educator if you have questions, or one of us that were on the Zoom tonight, and we'll be glad to continue this conversation with you at another time. So thank you, and we hope to see you next month on February 8th for our strategic and cost-effective mineral nutrition for sheep with Dr. Whit Stewart from the University of Wyoming. So thank you for attending, and thank you, Todd, and thank you, Lisa and Bernie. Have a great night.
thanks everybody for hopping on.